Nahum chapter 1. The burden of Nineveh. The book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. God is jealous, and the Lord revengeth. The Lord revengeth and is furious. The Lord will take vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserveth wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, and great in power, and will not at all acquit the wicked. The Lord hath his way in the whirlwind and in the storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebuketh the sea, and maketh it dry, and drieth up all the rivers. Bashan languisheth, and Carmel, and the flower of Lebanon languisheth. The mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence, yea, the world, and all that dwell therein. Who can stand before his indignation, and who can abide in the fierceness of his anger? His fury is poured out like fire, and rocks are thrown down by him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. But with an overrunning flood he will make an utter end of the place thereof, and darkness shall pursue his enemies. What do ye imagine against the Lord? He will make an utter end. Affliction shall not rise up the second time. For while they be folden together as thorns, and while they are drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dry. There is one come out of thee that imagineth evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. Thus saith the Lord, though they be quiet and likewise empty, yet thus shall they be cut down, when he shall pass through. Though I have afflicted thee, I will afflict thee no more. For now will I break his yoke from off thee, and will burst thy bonds in sunder. And the Lord hath given a commandment concerning thee, that no more of thy name shall be sown. Out of the house of thy gods will I cut off the graven image and the molten image. I will make thy grave, for thou art vile. Behold, upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feasts, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off. The book of Nahum has only 3 chapters in it, but there's some remarkable stuff in here. It deals primarily with what we would call the burden of Nineveh. We'll get to what that word burden means in a minute. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was a city that prided itself on its military power, on the rape and plunder and murder of tens of hundreds of thousands of people. And it was a place where there was idol worship, and for the people who were part of it, they figured it was an absolutely wonderful place to live. But for those people who were righteous, it was a place of living hell. Now, Nahum basically made the point that even though they had repented before, that this time there were going to be consequences for the things that they had done. And he served after 663 BC, which was the destruction of the Egyptian city of Nahum, which we also know as the city of Thebes by the Assyrian army. That was 663 BC. But before, another event took place, which was the destruction of another town, which happened in 612 BC. So we know he served in those 2 places. Now, the word used to signify burden in Hebrew is massa, M-A-S-S-A, we would pronounce it. And it has the idea of raising up the voice. So if you're in a room and everybody's sort of yelling at the top of they're talking at the top of their lungs, and you want to get their attention, you yell and you scream. So that would be the attention getting, raising up of the voice. And the significance of that is for Nineveh, or for burden of Nineveh, is that the Lord has got a heavy lot of hard news to tell these people. Now, the first 14 verses of the first chapter of Nahum are absolutely superb Hebrew poetry. absolutely stunning Hebrew poetry. Nahum is another prophet poet. It would take hours to explain all the ins and outs of the poetry. It does not translate well into English at all. Not because it couldn't, but because the Old Testament guys just didn't have the background in it, I guess, and it was really hard to translate through. However, it sets up with each of the first verses, or first verse 14, 1 to 14, starts off with an acrostic, one of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and it's used often. Basically it would be like saying, well, the first one starts off with an A, and then there's some special thing with the A in it in the first line, and the second one starts with a B, and there's something special. That's the kind of thing that we're going on here. And it is massively intelligent, really deep stuff, and the Jewish people loved this kind, and still do, love this kind of word, and I'm going to use the word game, but I don't mean it as a fun thing. They love the play on the words and the significance of the words and the use of words as how you put things together. This is just stuff that they just love doing. In verses 2 through 10 are basically deal with the second coming, and basically he uses the analogy of the second coming to describe the judgments that are going to happen to Nineveh, and basically said that when it's time, when it's fully ripe, that this capital of Nineveh would burn as dry stubble that was left over after the harvest. And that's basically it. I mean, it burns as a dried piece of grass. I used to have a field that I used to have to burn every spring so that the cow could have fresh grass. And when you get a little bit of a breeze and you get the dry grass, it burns faster than gasoline. It just goes. Verses 11 through 15 talk about a wicked counselor. And basically we think this was the time in the future, and he's talking about Nebuchadnezzar, probably, who laid a very heavy tribute on the Jews of gold and goods which they had to provide, and it was very onerous. And when he invaded them, he invaded with an army of about 200,000 people. Sorry, it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, it was Sennacherib who was the king. That's right, Nebuchadnezzar's father or grandfather. And he was telling them, Nahum was telling him, that this man's temple will become a grave, and other sorts of things happen. And what happened basically was Sennacherib went back to Nineveh, and 2 of his sons murdered Sennacherib while he was worshiping in the temple of his gods. And then these 2 sons ran away to Armenia, we think. And another of his sons, I think it was Nebuchadnezzar, it might have been one in between there, became the king. And it's amazing the things that the prophets tell about what's going to happen. But he's foretelling all of these things that are happening. And Israel could see the literal fulfillment of these things for hundreds and hundreds of years in the past that the prophets were telling them. And they weren't paying much attention to the fact that the prophets were telling them, and the stuff had a history of universally coming exactly true. They weren't paying attention. Now, if you had a prophet that was telling you something today, would you pay attention?